Hello, this is S.K. Williams, and today I would like to talk to you about atheistic ideological blindness. One of the things about militant atheism that people will notice is that the very nature of it contradicts what it claims to be. Militant atheists like to feign being upset by being called militant atheists, claiming that they are not militant. This is a derogatory term theists applied to them to demean them and act as if they are violent. And they'll point out that they're not violent, they just disagree. And they'll point that militant Muslims are terrorists blowing up buildings like the Two Towers, and militant Christians are blowing up abortion clinics and unaliving loads of people. But militant atheists are just sitting at the coffee shop sipping their latte, not threatening anyone. And of course, we all know that's not really true. I mean, after all, Charlie Kirk is no longer with us because a militant atheist decided to take his beliefs and act upon them by silencing him. And that is what brings us to the topic today, because I received one of the most infrequent things on my channel, a visitor. This channel has never been particularly popular or large. It's never had a large audience, and admittedly the audience shrank considerably when Gaggle gagged me and I was offline for 7 months. Though that wasn't actually the longest period of time I went between posting. My house burned down 6 years ago, and it took several years to bother getting back on. But it is important to note that I've only been posting new videos on the Tube of You for about a month now. I have only been able to post videos for about a month. Now, granted, I do have to have some self-congratulatory note of myself. I did realize that this could happen to me. I took the liberty of scheduling several videos that extended to the end of the year. I was hoping to get 2 or 3 years worth of videos, but I couldn't manage it before I was snuffed out. And as soon as Gaggle admitted that under the Biden administration it had been pressured to not permit certain speech, and began a program of reinstating certain channels, like Computing Forever, the original channel for Dave Cullen. He did a video on this recently. My channel was one of the ones that was restored. And do keep in mind, I have been posting videos during the 7 months of my exile from the Tube of You. Those videos were simply on Ramble or on the Shoot of Bit. Especially on Ramble, because it was the new platform for me. And I even have more of my Bishop's Bible animated videos over on Ramble than I have over here. I actually completed the book of Exodus, for instance. But I was removed from the Tube of You. Which is what makes it interesting, because last week I made 4 videos. I intended to make 3, but I had forgotten I had already made 1, so I made 1 too many. But I posted all of them. I usually operate on the rule of 3. And the reason I do that is because I can't be certain that the tube of you will allow my videos to go up. Since my exile ended, I haven't had that problem really with them flagging videos and warning me not to post them, or asking me whether or not I want to because of the hate speech or misinformation. But I am by nature cautious. And I already know that the Tube OU is still not permitting certain speech, because I still find posting comments sometimes difficult, though it is getting better. Since their open admission to censoring conservatives, especially on certain issues like the plague from a few years ago, or from modification of temperature and weather that is caused by man, or certain other issues such as promoting President Daniel Trumpet, I have noticed that they've become a lot less restrictive. And you have to remember they were more restrictive for small channels with small audiences than they were for larger channels. They didn't want to be very obvious in what they were doing. Which isn't to say larger channels couldn't fall afoul of them, but they definitely could. But the way the system was set up, it was being run by Al Gore and his rhythm, and there was no actual way to really frame it in a human understanding, because it didn't function in a typically human way. It factored in things like view counts, the revenue it makes for the site, and such like, as well as the content they wanted to remove. And I really don't think my channel was targeted by humans. I think humans would have just ignored my channel because it is small. It's a hobby channel. It's not one that I designed hoping that I would have a career on the tube of you. It's simply something that I did for my own amusement that I would like to share with maybe some people. And if it picks up, it picks up. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I've never had a particularly high aspiration for my Tube OU career. It is simply something that I do. Indeed, even on my Ramble channel, where I faced no overtones of word monitoring and retained my liberty of word, I ran into problems in my real life that I prioritized over making videos, and as such was unable to fulfill my ambition for the Bishop's Bible, which was to complete the entire Old Testament in 2025. I shall instead be releasing it again on a new channel, both here on the Tube OU and on Ramble, and perhaps on the Shoot of Bit and Motion Daily, so that I could preserve it. But I don't blame anyone for that. Life happened, and I don't prioritize the videos. But with all that said, and all of that is necessary background for this, I really never had much of a problem with not getting that many views. Although I do have certain problems with Ramble, more so than the Tube of You, because its system really needs to be rejiggered so that, well, it actually starts recommending videos and promoting smaller channels so they can grow. And right now, Ramble's mechanism for that makes actual channel growth difficult. But that's a system-wide problem, not active discrimination. And other people have discussed that, and since this is not principally about Ramble or even really about the two of you, but it's important to discuss the two of you before I continue. The point is that what is important to me is my ability to post the videos and say what I want. Not how many views I get or how much engagement I get. A lot of my videos are niche, and I realize that I have very bad sound equipment, and I don't have the money to get better sound equipment. I'm using primitive animation software, and I'm really just speaking off the cuff most of the time. I don't even bother writing a script of any sort. I just turn on the microphone and start speaking. I don't do tags, and I'm not really promoting my channel. But it was still, nevertheless, disheartening to one day find greater and greater restrictions and being told that you're guilty of hate speech or misinformation and that you need to monitor yourself or have your channel threatened with unleashing, removal from the platform, and to finally be locked out of your account. And all of that happened to me. And that's what brings us to today, with our infrequent visitor that I mentioned earlier. And yes, I know, it's 11 minutes in before I got to this point. One of the other methods that I've used to avoid Al Gore and his rhythm is breaking up the content. But it does make it drag a bit. Still, the principal reason I even load videos on this channel now that I've gotten it back is just so that I can. I actually intend on creating a couple of new channels where hopefully I can speak more freely and more normally, but at least now I don't have to speak like a cartoon character like I have been, except on certain points of the video where it will still hit sensitive issues. And of course, I'm still using so that I can avoid Al Gore and his rhythm. None of which is, of course, desirable. It would be far better if I were permitted to simply say what I wished to say. After all, we as a society are supposed to value liberty of word. And yet, the large corporations don't. And that brings us to my visitor. You see, I had made a video on why it's really not possible to talk to militant atheists, because even though they have this pretense of being rationalists and free-thinkers who look at the evidence and follow it where it leads and are simply pointing out logical fallacies only if they see them, but would be honest and change their mind with evidence, in reality, the modern militant atheist movement is a religion. I should be very, very remiss if I didn't point out that I'm not calling atheism a religion, and I'm certainly not calling a mere lack of belief in a God a religion. But atheism is not a mere lack of belief in a God. Atheism is a belief that no gods exist. And it was only redefined in 1976 with the presumption of atheism by Anthony Flew, and now we're supposed to pretend that this was the original definition going back 3,000 years to ancient Greece with the ancient word atheos, but it clearly didn't if you look at the etymology of the word. And even historical atheists that they've dug up quotes from to prove that they also understood atheism as a lack of belief in a God. Bertrand Russell, Robert Ingersoll, Charles Bradlaugh, none of their quotes actually say atheism is a lack of belief in a God, and you simply find that the atheists are reading that meaning into these isolated quotes without trying to understand them on their own terms or within the context of the works they came from. After all, Ingersoll wrote an entire essay, The God Factory, where he talks about gods being invented. It makes no sense to see him as someone who merely lacks belief. But they'll use a quote from him and pretend that that somehow proves he did. The same thing with Charles Bradlaugh. The usual quote with him is that he said that he didn't even know what the word God meant, and that's supposed to be taken to mean that he lacked belief. But if you read the theological essays, it's obvious that's not his argument. But that doesn't matter right now, except as part of the background. You see, I'm not going to even go into detail about what the other atheists that I spoke to and made a video on were. I will tell you what they were saying just so you can get the gist of it. But I'm not going to go into detail because I already made 4 separate videos on that topic. And you can check them out on my channel. I'm only giving this for the context of the new conversation. And I'm doing this purely to clarify what exactly the situation was. But you see, I was speaking to this atheist who, like all of them, was doing the usual nonsense about how everything I said was based on logical fallacies and special pleading and all that nonsense that they say. And it was very obvious that he didn't really understand what it was that I was saying, or why I was saying it, or trying to actually address the ideas that I brought up. And it should also be noted that I was not making any arguments. I was simply addressing his arguments when he came in and he made questions and he launched into attacks. This is important to note because atheists are programmed to think that atheists never do that. They simply passively lack belief in a God, and it's the theist approaching them, making claims and trying to convert them and win them over. So even when the atheist comes to the Christian board explicitly to mock Christianity and get people to stop believing in God, that atheist merely lacks belief in a God and is being passive, and you're the one that's approached them to make the claim. It's silly, but this is how they always conceptualize it. But in reality, the atheist was making arguments, and I was offering the counter. And it was pretty obvious that this atheist had no interest in thinking through the implications of what he was saying or what I was saying, because someone else in the thread had said, without God, you can't have an ultimate source of morality. And he responded in the usual way atheists respond by saying, I don't see how God would be an objective standard for morality even. Even if God exists, how would that make him the objective standard for morality? And of course, I offered an explanation for why God would be the objective standard for morality. And it was an explanation that he didn't understand, and he brought up the multiverse, and what if he creates a universe? Because he didn't understand the basic point. The basic point that I made was that God is the source of everything that exists. God created the universe and the universal laws that operate the universe. He created the laws of nature. Morality is living within accordance to how you are designed to live, and that optimizes your existence within those fundamental laws and principles. Sin, or violation of God's will, would also be a violation of certain natural principles and would lead to an undesirable conclusion. Rather like a machine where an engineer designed it to work a certain way. And while there are certain things you just can't do with a machine, there are some things you can do with a machine, but those things are not what the machine was designed to do or how it was designed to do it, and are actually bad for the machine, adding wear and tear where you wouldn't have it before, or causing it to possibly break and need repair. Sin, in this context, would be understood as something that is physically possible for you to do. but which is still outside of the design of how the universe was supposed to work. When we commit sin, when we do something that is immoral, we are violating natural principles and will have natural consequences. But those natural consequences ultimately were authored by God. And the point that I was making in regards to this was that you can't really point to anything outside of God to serve as a basis of morality, because God is the basis of existence. That means anything you point to as a basis for morality will ultimately trace back to God. And that's why God is the objective standard for morality, because God is an intelligent being that directed the universe to work a certain way. The natural laws that we find ourselves living in were authored by God, and they're therefore an expression of his will, and we cannot appeal to anything outside of God that could actually serve as the basis of our morality. Instead of trying to understand this, and do keep in mind, I also brought up Paul Tillich, and I also brought up Paul Tillich saying that God is the ground of being, and I pointed out how in theology God is not simply someone who created us and tells us what to do. He is also the basis of our existence. And he ignored most of what I said. This atheist then asked, he basically acted like my argument was simply reducible to, the reason God is allowed to make the moral rules we live by is because God created the universe, and that's what makes him the objective moral standard. So he asked, well, if I made a universe, would that make me the objective moral standard of that universe? And then he followed up with saying that he doesn't think I would allow for that. I would find some excuse why he isn't the objective moral standard for the universe he created, while God is the objective moral standard for what he created. And of course, then I would be guilty of special pleading, which is a logical fallacy, and we theists are always guilty of logical fallacies, which atheists, driven by logic and facts and reason, always like to point out. His point being that there is no rational basis for me to say he is not the objective moral standard for a universe he creates, if I'm saying that about God. The problem with his argument is that I wasn't arguing that God had the right to tell us what moral rules to live by because he created the universe, and that's what makes him the objective moral standard, just because he has the right to tell us what to do because he created the universe. My point was that the universe itself is an extension of his own will, that he created the laws of nature that define it, and that ultimately, when we do something that is not moral, we will face natural consequences based upon how the laws of the universe themselves work. And this only works if you are not yourself subject to the laws of nature, but are instead the authors of the laws of nature. Which brings us back to this bloke who created another universe. Well, he didn't really. You see, he is a contingent being. He came from his own parents, who came from their parents, who came from their parents, and so on, all the way back down through the evolutionary line. And ultimately, life itself, as what he is a product of natural forces, forces that he cannot transcend, forces that he himself is subject to. So even accepting that he can create a universe, he can't be the objective moral standard of that universe because he is not the basis of the existence of that universe. Rather, the universe he came from would be the objective standard for that universe, because you can't transcend your own nature. You exist within the context of your nature, which defines your being. So everything he does would be contingent on his own existence within a framework of a natural law system that already exists in our universe. Which also brings up the main problem with atheists pointing to the multiverse with many universes in it. In addition to, of course, not being able to prove we live in a multiverse with multiple universes, they seem to think that when you talk about a first cause argument, you're only talking about God creating this one universe and are not talking about the other universes in a multiverse, when in reality, God is understood as the author of existence. That without God, you cannot exist at all in anything. So the multiverse would actually be the universe in classical philosophical terms. And it's not really special pleading to point that out, because a being from our universe who creates another universe is actually just creating a subdivision within a broader universe. We may call that the multiverse with multiple universes, but that's just wordplay. And it doesn't change the fundamental meaning of the original argument, which is that God created everything else. God did not just create a universe, which is only one universe in a multiverse of multiple universes. God is the source of everything else that exists, which would include the multiverse. And God determined the laws of nature that regulate the multiverse and its other universes. Whereas a person in our universe who creates another universe is going to have to use the natural forces in our universe to create the other universe. He is contingent on those other forces himself. And that's the whole point. And of course, he didn't understand that. He didn't understand when I said the multiverse would be the actual universe in classical philosophical terms. Because he actually said, multiverse! That means many universes! As if I didn't understand that. And I genuinely think he didn't think I understood it. Because I'm a religious person, and that makes me an idiot. And I don't understand the smarty things that atheists do. And that's the whole point. The bloke very clearly didn't understand the concept he was dealing with. When people talk about God being the creator of the universe, they're not saying he created a universe, which is only one universe in the multiverse. They're saying he created everything that exists, other than himself. And I have to add that because atheists are very bad at actually reading things charitably. And they seem to think if I say God created everything, it means God created himself. And that's just ridiculous. In fact, this bloke that I was speaking to earlier said that. And this brings us to our new one, though. The new one who bills himself as compassionate. Came to my channel, addressed the situation that I mentioned about being locked out of my account for 7 months by telling me that the real reason for me not getting views and getting engagement was because my content is bad, as if I could just improve my content and get better views, when I was locked out of my account and couldn't load new content. And of course, said of me that everything I was saying proved that I'm an emotional thinker, not an evidential one. This is, of course, nonsense. I'm not an emotional thinker rather than an evidential one. And of course, I got the list of fallacies that I'm going to commit because I'm a religious person and religious people don't think rationally and commit logical fallacies, special pleading and all that rubbish. And this person just couldn't get it through his head. I had been locked out of my Gaggle account. Gaggle admitted to censor on the ship conservatives. Gaggle has already reinstated channels that had not violated the terms of service. Gaggle began reinstating channels that had not violated the terms of service that they had nevertheless locked in September, which is when I returned. The House Judiciary Committee within the United States of America's Congress addressed this issue and is investigating the matter and is considering whether or not to send it to federal court. There is enough evidence to send to a grand jury for a federal court indictment. All of that is relevant. All of that is relevant because all of that means that I have evidence that what I'm saying actually happened to me. And this bloke told me that I have no evidence. None at all. That it was just my emotions. And that the real reason I wasn't getting views and engagement was because my content was bad. And that was the response of the audience. I couldn't even post new content, and he's telling me that my content is bad, and that's why I'm not getting engagement. Come off it. The reason I wasn't allowed to load new content was because I was locked out of my account. It had nothing to do with viewership. Although, even before I was locked out, I was doing videos that were worse even than I used to do. But that's because I was trying to avoid the censor on the ship while testing the methods to see how far I can go. I actually succeeded in one of my videos. I didn't make another one exactly like it because I don't like doing videos that way, but it did prove my point. I have one video on my channel that is over 2,000 views. And it's a video where I use a very harsh, angry voice and a lot of slurring and insults. But I do it in a way where I carefully chose which words I put in what order. Not so carefully that it was entirely scripted, but I very selectively made this video. And the video is, of course, calling out atheists. And I'm very, very, very harsh on them. But I modeled it after certain popular atheist YouTubers and what they say of Christians. Which I did because, for one, if I was right, and this is an intelligent synthetica that's targeting me and not a human, then it won't really understand what it is that I'm saying, and it's really just measuring tone and certain word patterns. And I was right. The tone of voice that I used, the harsh language, and the pattern of the words matched atheist content, which is hypercritical and hyper-angry at Christianity. And it not only went through without a hitch, it was my most successful video on my entire channel. All I had to do was talk like an angry atheist, with the exception that I was angry at the atheist rather than angry at religion. And considering I actually ran that test and it was successful, you would think that that would be evidence that I was being targeted. But of course it's not, because nothing will ever be evidence for atheists, because they don't care about evidence, they care about preserving their narrative. The fact of the matter is this. I am not an emotional thinker who believes in my religion because it makes me feel good, and I'm not someone who's ignoring evidence to the contrary. Atheists never show evidence that my religion is wrong, they just demand that I accept the sole burden of proof, whilst endlessly moving the goalposting of exactly what it is that I'm supposed to prove, because even though we're all supposed to pretend that they merely lack belief in a God and will change their mind with evidence, the fact of the matter is, they will not change their mind with evidence. They've already decided that religion is rubbish, that God does not exist, and that we live in a materialist universe. This is, of course, their religion, but because they frame things the way they do, they insist on seeing themselves as non-religious, dividing the world into these two great camps between the secular and the religious, with atheists being secularists with no religion and having embraced reason and science, whilst the religious are primitive cavemen, basing everything on their feelings and rejecting science and reason. And bizarrely, this poster on my channel was doing exactly that, without realizing the irony of telling a religious person that he's not being rational and basing all his beliefs on emotion and not evidence, when that's what the atheist is doing. The atheists these days who attack religion endlessly are basing their arguments on how it feels good to know that you're superior to religious people, how you're more moral than religious people, how you're more intelligent than religious people, how you're more rational than religious people, how you live in reality unlike religious people, how you're brave enough to stand against the tide. People who become militant atheists are like anyone else who joins a hate group, which is what militant atheism is. It wouldn't exist if it couldn't criticize Christianity. All it really has is bog-standard humanism and bog-standard progressivism, and that's it, beyond its criticism of Christianity. And you can be a progressive without being a militant atheist. So it's really just this extra unnecessary baggage where you're picking unnecessary fights. Because while virtually all progressives would fight and stand against conservative churches, many progressives see themselves as Christian, and even some of the atheist progressives who aren't militant atheists realize that liberal churches can be allies to their cause. But not so with militant atheists, who declare progressive Christians to be moderate believers who don't really believe in what their religion teaches, unlike the fundamentalists. Sam Harris did the same thing when he said that the world is divided between religious moderates and religious fundamentalists. It's this bizarre black and white thinking that infests the modern atheist community that prevents them from seeing any sort of nuance or difference. But it is one that nevertheless is very real and embedded deeply into the atheist psyche when it comes to militant atheism. And therein lies the point. Before this person had ever even heard of me, they knew that religious people base their beliefs on emotion rather than evidence, and that they commit all sorts of logical fallacies. And they simply said this about me. They even brought up the idea that I'm projecting my faults as a religious person onto the atheist. And they didn't really seem to realize that I've heard all this garbage before, and it's not really true. I'm not projecting my faults onto the atheists. I'm not being dishonest. I'm not shifting the burden of proof when I tell them they have to prove what they say is true. I'm not driven by emotion rather than reason and evidence. And it certainly isn't true that they're looking at the evidence. After all, I showed this person, when this person demanded that I prove that Gaggle had gagged me and had been censoring conservatives, I pointed to the Senate Judiciary Committee. I quoted their entire statement. By the way, on their Senate Judiciary Committee, you can also see the letter Gaggle sent admitting to what they did and how they were pressured by the Biden administration to silence conservatives. You can see that on their own site of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And this person responded to the quote from the Senate Judiciary Committee by saying it was a partisan press release. I showed news articles, they were just disregarded. And then they even brought this, even if what you said were true, as if what I'm saying isn't true, but for the sake of argument we'll accept it is, that wouldn't mean it happened to you. And at this point you just can't be bothered to take them seriously. It's obvious that this person wants to deny that Gaggle was censoring conservatives, even though they admitted they were doing so. And even if this person were forced to admit that they were censoring conservatives, That wouldn't mean they were censoring me, S.K. Williams. There is literally no evidence I could show this person to convince them that I was locked out of my account for 7 months, because they don't want to believe it. It's based on their emotions and how it makes them feel being an atheist. Which is why when they say that religious people like me are driven by our emotions and think emotionally and not evidentially, it's projection. That's what they do. They don't care about evidence. They just listen to other atheists and repeat the narrative. And that's what I was stuck with. And it makes a nice little highlight to the video I had made before. I will make 2 more videos on this topic because I have not yet ended my policy of making 3 videos on the same topic just to make certain that at least one of them goes through. So you can watch out for the other 2 videos on the topic. But for now, I shall take my leave of you. Thank you, God bless, and goodbye.